Hi again then guys, and welcome to the last but most definitely not least car review from the 1.40 selection, the Toyota Sports 800, a car which could very easily be underestimated, but of course the community chatter is already there. It was there pretty much from day one when the car dropped. In its stock form, it's deceptively underwhelming. It's in a similar kind of territory to a Fiat 500, a classic Beetle, a Samba bus even. Nothing particularly impressive across the board. Of course it's lightweight because there's nothing to it. It's got barely any power, barely any torque, tiny engine, and it's pretty expensive for what it is, 60,000 credits. So who cares, really, about this tiny little sports car? Well, that's actually one of the things that surprised me, because when I was talking on the Discord server before the 1.40 patch dropped, I was surprised by the amount of people who actually did seem excited for this car, because I've never heard that chatter before. Now maybe it was there and I just wasn't aware of it, but I do not hear people clamouring over the Toyota Sports 800 coming back to the game, and yet here we are. And it's one of those cars that's had the premium update treatment, which is nice to see. It's always cool to see a returning face, an old friend if you will, but now in full HD glory, because for those who don't know what premium means, in the past of Gran Turismo there were certain cars that were not premiums, so they still had like PS2 era graphics, just a black interior with no detail. I know, sounds crazy, and the graphics weren't that great. They were passable at the time, and many people actually would put up with that even now. Not sure if I'd go that far, but I understand what you mean. I do miss having more cars as well. But this one has been updated, and boy has it been. The graphics are a lot better. Having an interior at all is nice on any car, let alone a fast one. And speaking of fast ones, what kind of potential does this have? Because as you can see from the video here, it's moving. It certainly isn't slow, and that is of course because this one is tuned. Now it's not heavy to begin with at 580 kilos, but you can drop it to 545. Speaking of which, of course, I will have to be updating that lightest cars countdown vid, which I did quite a while ago. In terms of the engine, 790cc, which is a 0.8 litre, in other words, it's putting out a whopping 43 horsepower, probably more like 43 mule power, and 49 pound-feet of torque. So more torque than power. Interesting. The weight is low, the power is low, but because of those two combined, the power per tonne isn't too bad, 74, which, you know, of course, it's not going to be great, but it's pretty healthy for what it is. The price tag, though, not so healthy. 60,000, that's like Porsche territory, or at least in my mind, or Honda NSX kind of territory, and of course that's in the real world in the earlier 2000s at least. In the game, it's a little bit cheaper than the Clio V6, which is of course 70 grand. For what it is, that sounds like a lot. Is it really worth getting? Well, there is something that I want to address when it comes to this car, and it's specifically to do with all the chatter that people have been saying about how seemingly OP this vehicle is. I would actually counter that argument by saying I don't believe this is OP at all. And I know that might be controversial, I think it's just very good. Because for it to be OP would indicate that it's too dominant, it's far too good in its category. Something like a Porsche 991 GT3 for instance, when the game first came out, or the Group 3 Beetle. They're known for being OP. This is not an OP vehicle. In fact, I tested it around Dragon Trail, and it's not even as quick as half of the M100 cars that I've built there, so it's far from being OP. There are plenty of K cars that can beat this quite easily, by quite a few seconds in fact per lap, so it's certainly not OP. So I think what people mean by that is probably in comparison to the stock specs. It has such a tiny amount of power to begin with, and the difference between something like this and a Samba bus or a Beetle or a Fiat 500 is that the jump in performance is far more drastic than with those. The Beetle is not too far off, it's a very good car. Samba bus is the Fiat 500 is This one though is fast, real fast compared to what it was, so that's probably why people think it feels so OP, and don't get me wrong, it certainly feels like it could beat everything in N100, but the simple fact is it can't. Now that's not to say that you cannot use this to beat more powerful cars. You can for sure, but most circumstances where you'll find that it will be in stuff like career mode, where the cars aren't necessarily being driven to the best of their ability, let's say, and even the cars themselves aren't necessarily fast just because they're powerful. You can have a huge, heavy, powerful limo, be beaten by a tiny little underpowered sports car 9 out of 10 times, because it doesn't matter how much power you've got if you can't use it, if you can't get it around a corner. Put something like a Jay Leno tank car up against a Caterham, see which one wins. So as far as this one goes, the performance is undoubtedly good, but I definitely push back against the idea that it's OP. It's not. It's just very impressive in terms of tuning capabilities, and I don't recall it being that great in the previous game. I used it, and I think I did a review for it here on the channel, and if I have, you can go out and, of course, check that and see the difference in graphics. But I don't recall it being this overwhelmingly impressive little sports car back then, whereas now it feels great. It feels really, really good, and the fact that it has the detailed interior, the better visuals, it's just a nice, pleasant, charming little car to work with. I would actually say it's probably the most surprising car of the pack in a good way, because of course the Red Bull was kind of the opposite, surprisingly slow. This one though, surprisingly quick, and unlike certain other vehicles in the past, such as the early 2000s Mini that was added in one of the updates, or the notorious Honda Fit, this isn't one of those occasions where it went from, oh I don't want that, to, oh it's passable. This is one of those where it went from, I'm curious to see what it's going to be like, to, wow, this is a really good little classic car. So that's a nice situation to be in, at least for me, and I know that many of you have similar feelings based on the comments and the messages that I've seen about the Sports 800. Now, in terms of the car's ability, using it online, offline, I already touched on the fact that it has a lot of use in career mode. In lobbies though, I would caution you, because you could very easily be overconfident, because the car feels great. It really does feel great. You can fly through corners in this thing. It feels like a borderline go-kart. It's so small, so low to the ground, the center of gravity is like a snail, it's so low, the weight is so low, but it doesn't have the straight line grunt that the K cars have, especially something like, you know, a Honda S660 or something, a much newer machine, or even something like a Daihatsu Copen. I was going to say the Core. The Daihatsu Copen I think could probably beat this. In fact, I believe my lap time at Dragon Trail was quicker in that Daihatsu, and a number of others. If this was up against the Mini, the classic Mini, both of them tuned, my money would be on the Mini, because that Mini is a true OP vehicle. I mean, you guys saw me way back, I think in Beards and Cars, take that thing around the Nordschleife and beat literal supercars with it. It's that good. This, not necessarily that level, but good. You could probably beat sports cars in this one, but not necessarily supercars. Overall then, that's it for my thoughts on the S800, and of course, check out my reviews and tunes for all of the other cars in the pack as well if you haven't already. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.